Today, my guest is Jeff Meade from Creative Friction, a management consultant to creative agencies. Welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Creative agencies, that makes me wonder, what is exactly the entity that we mean? Because obviously these things are often quite fluid.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I would say, there's people who a couple years ago, I would have just called them marketing agencies, and then some people hide from that term. And, then there was even probably a few years before that, it was digital agencies, but now anybody who's in the creative space has to be doing digital. So there's no reason to call out digital. So I think for me, it's really anybody who does marketing services, right? That's where I put in the creative firms. And I expand it, right? It could be PR. It could be folks doing experiential, putting on events. It's also folks who are doing web design, stuff like that. But if you're providing a marketing service, I think the easiest way is you're working for a client and they see you as a marketing partner. You fall under that umbrella of marketing, then you're a creative agency by and large.
How does it relate to creative studios? So people that work in visual industry doing 3D animation, films, video, film production, this kind of stuff.
My focus is really on the folks who are providing marketing services to companies, right? And I think that is people who are providing creative, that's like studios, they're doing movies, anything in that realm. And oftentimes they're creating maybe even products or they're partnering with other studios, right? That's a little different than in my world, the clients that I work with, the agencies that I work with, they're oftentimes working with a big company and they're helping them with their advertising.
Which is getting us a little bit closer, but also reiterating the nuances and like volatility of these categories, right?
Yeah, I think people often run into this situation where it's, for some reason, creative folks don't want to put themselves in a bucket, right? It's so hard for them to just say, oh, I'm this type of firm, right? They want to be multi-hyphenates, right? Everybody wants to be an EGOT. They can't just say, I'm X or I'm Y. So the people in this industry are partly to blame as well.
Gotcha. Well, everybody's wearing so many hats at the same time as advisors and consultants who are trying to help them improve their positioning and probably narrow it down a little bit. And drop some hats, at least in terms of public communications and how they talk to other people, how they present themselves. So we got that. And an interesting transition happened because earlier you worked under Meade Company.
Yeah, the Meade Company.
And you changed it to Creative Friction. And that also coincided with the transition from operations more to kind of like coaching thing.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that? What's the difference?
Yeah, so the Meade Company, which is pretty much just based on my last name. So not terribly creative with naming, but what in my past life, I'll just give a quick summary. I've started agencies and I've grown agencies pretty successfully. And, when you're in it, you don't realize the success at the moment. Right now, I look back and I'm like, oh, wow, that was pretty good in the moment. I feel like as you climb different levels, you start comparing yourself to different people. And as they say, comparison is the thief of joy. And I think that typified me as I was growing my agency. I was just never satisfied. But I did that for a while and I went away and started working on the client side and was running marketing for a retailer actually. And then found my way back into this space. And when I came back, kind of long story short, I kind of fell into helping a couple of folks out with their agencies, and the light bulb went off in my head, and I said, "Wow, I'm actually pretty good at this, and it's fun, it's exciting." And so I found myself doing a lot of consulting, and really where I saw the services was really where I saw the need, and the biggest need I saw was there were agencies who just were having a hard time getting clients, And the way I could fix that, I saw was pretty simple. And it was just their positioning was all over the place. And so I did a lot of positioning work with clients just to help them build their own brand, right? It's actually pretty funny for anybody outside the industry that agencies have such a hard time branding themselves. They do it for so many other people, but really tough to do it for
Cobbler
themselves.
shoes.
Exactly. So was doing a lot of positioning, and then obviously once you get the positioning right, the next challenge that I would see is then agencies would bring the business in and they would do it, and all their resources would go to doing the work, and then they'd go get more business. And so they had these ebbs and flows, peaks or valleys, if you will. And so I was just helping them with the operations part, just trying to smooth everything out so they can actually run the operation. And that was really the focus for a couple years. And really, as I started to see what was happening in the industry, both for my clients and myself, and really where I wanted to spend more of my time as I spun off into creative friction, was really just seeing where my clients were going and what they needed help with. And so, there's definitely the positioning and operations. I still think that's a need. But increasingly, after I would do that stuff, I would be called upon to work with these leaders in an advisory role. Many of them had never ran a business, definitely never ran a business of the scale that they had. And they just needed somebody who'd been in the trenches before, who knew what they were going through. And so that's where I've shifted to, just really focus on the advisory stuff. And yeah, the positioning stuff still comes up, but it just comes up through the coaching conversations where we're talking about how do we turn this business around, or how do we grow this business? But it's really built on the leader or the owner of the agency and how I can help coach them to this next level that they want to get to.
Totally.
Yeah.
So you brought three interesting, different terms of different areas. And, the more I think about it and the more I talk to people about it, these things are, again, fluid and pretty much overlapping, but at the same time, they are quite distinct. So now we have advisory, we have coaching, and we have consulting. How would you draw boundaries between these?
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where I use the terms interchangeably. The advisory is really, the role I play there is just a trusted advisor. So it's somebody that, hey, I have this challenge and I need some help. And it's not even sometimes that I'm being called upon to answer a question. Sometimes it's, I help them think about the questions that they should be thinking about, right, when they have challenges. And so it really is just guiding them to a place that they probably was going to get to, quite honestly. I'm just helping them get there a whole lot quicker. That's really how I see my service. Coaching, if I had to draw a line, and it's really similar, but for coaching, I think there's a lot more accountability. And I think where that happens is really just based on the person. I've dealt with some folks and still are working with some people where I am an advisor, but really I play more of a coaching role in that they just need to be held accountable. I think, and the one agency I'm thinking about in particular, they are really good at knowing where they got to get to. It's the follow through of actually doing the work. And so for them, I just do a lot more accountability, and I have to be a lot more deliberate and intentional about, hey, let's meet at this time because you said you were going to do this. Have we moved the ball? Right. And actually just working with them, it took me some time to figure out that that's what they needed. They could get there. They just needed somebody to hold them accountable. And once I started holding them accountable, they took off. Right. And so I think there's nuance in all of it, but it really is just depending on the person and their personality. Quite honestly.
So we're back to the very nature of creative industry, where again we can wear many hats, right?
Right.
Interchangeably, you can switch from consulting to advisory and then become a little bit of a coach.
Right.
Interestingly, yesterday I had a chat with Jeff Meade. Joe Nash, who had his own shop, and then he worked as a business development person in Back, which is a huge design studio, and then transitioned to his own business. And we were chatting about this thing that, yeah, we can talk about like big goals and, bold future and operations and details. But what these guys often need is to solve the accountability problem, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, very interestingly, I recently got to know Max Traylor, who's same space agency consultant.
I think Max actually went to the same school as me, if I'm not mistaken. I think when I first heard his name, I think I was like, oh, we went to the same school. I could be making that up, but I think Max went to Babson College, so we had the same alma mater.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So what do you know about his approach? Because I'm mentioning him for a reason.
No, you go, and then I'll add. Yeah.
I find it to be a pretty interesting concept because the way he sees things is that obviously the more you want to go into strategy and like big thinking, the farther you would like to be from such mundane and basic things as coaching, which is focused on accountability. So the way he approaches that is, he says, build a program or price your program in such way that, well, you get sufficient margin that you can hire a person that is simply assisting you and taking on the accountability partner for the agency so that you don't have to do it yourself and you can focus on more strategic stuff, more big picture. And, well, depending on the kind of engagement, I find it a very good concept.
I know Max's name because he's in the industry. I can't say I could speak to his work. That's the only tough thing. But I just know his name has come up, right? So I can't really speak to his work too much.
The reason I mentioned that, like still going back to this triangle, the way I see it as difference is like, consultants think of like these big consulting companies. They come in, roll up their sleeves and do the work actually. So consultants are doing work. Advisors, just to simplify that for people who like don't have clarity about it. Advisors are people that never touch the thing, right?
Right.
They tell how things should be. They focus on the big picture. They help you make the right decisions, move in the right direction.
Right.
And the way I understand it is like coaching is more of this like soft interpersonal thing and essentially helping people figure out the way on their own. So you're not doing the work, you're not facilitating the work, you're helping them figuring it out for themselves.
Right.
That's the clearest way I can draw these divisions.
Yeah, the last coaching client that I onboarded, I was trying to draw a parallel, because she was saying, well, she had a lot of challenges and still does. And she was saying, just help me, I need to get this done and that done. And I said, okay, I hear you. And I said, just to be clear, my work is similar to like a physical trainer, right? When you go to the gym, I'm not going to lift the weights for you, but I'm going to give you a plan to help you get in shape and show you what you need to do and be there right next to you as you're doing it. But I will not be getting on the bench and I will not be lifting any bars. That's your job. But I will make sure you do it efficiently and I'll make sure that you achieve the goals that you want to achieve. And I think just visually that helped her because, she's like, I need somebody to do this and that. And I said, that's not me. I'm not gonna, and then think in our world, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Part of the coaching, consulting, advisory world is there's a lot of fractional folks. And the fractional folks are the ones who will come into your business for a set amount of time and actually take stuff off of your plate and do it. And I think you have to just be clear on what you provide because up front, when I'm talking to somebody, I don't want them to think that I'm going to come in and be a copy of them, just somebody who's high level that can do different work. I'll help you think through what you got to do, but it's still up to you to do it. I'm just making your life easier. Curious on your thoughts.
I have a bold and sharp perspective on fractional. It has become quite fashionable recently. I would say even hyped. And obviously, that's not a novel thing. It's been around for decades.
Right.
But normally, you had like fractional. Who was fractional? Chief finance officer.
Right.
These roles were typically fractional. Whereas recently, what's happening is that more marketing people are becoming fractional. And we've even seen these memes where you would have a fractional dog at an agency, right? The problem I have with this is obviously positioning, right? Because what is an expectation from someone who advertises themselves as a fractional? Well, when do you need a fractional?
Right.
When you have a problem and it's serious and you're a kind of mindset that throws money at a problem, not time, and you will go and get experts. You will get the best possible advisor you can get, black belt level expert to figure things out.
Right.
When you don't have the pro advisory mindset, but you want to have someone in-house, you'll hire a senior full-time in-house person that brings all this experience and becomes part of the company. And there is more control.
Right.
The relationship is tighter, but it still makes a lot of sense, right? So when do you go for a fractional? When you cannot afford an advisor, you cannot afford a decent full-timer, you probably have a bunch of juniors which are not actually lifting the weight.
Right.
And you need someone to fix it on a cheap.
Right.
Maybe it's a bit of an exaggeration, but I don't know. Tell me, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say an exaggeration. What I think is, in our world, outside of the financial fractional folks, because it makes so much sense. You just can't get that brain power into your business for what it would cost to hire that person full time. I think that makes a lot of sense. The marketing folks, though, I just think well, I'll first look at it from the marketing person. That's a hard business to be in, because essentially you become part of that agency for a set amount of time. And oftentimes you don't work with anyone else because you're so tied into the company, right? And so usually it's not fractional in terms of, I'm going to work 4 hours a day with you. Usually it's fractional in terms of, you have me for the next 3 months. That's how I usually see it. Obviously, it can break down a bunch of ways. The problem is, as a business model, because you get so caught up with one client, it's so hard for you to get other clients. And then it's hard for you to get other clients and say, but I can't work with you until 2 months from now, right? It's just a really tough business to be in. And I think the agencies that we work with in terms of fractional aren't able to pay enough for you to be just working with them solely on a fractional basis. And so where I was going to go is, I think fractional makes a lot more sense if you're working with enterprise type companies, right? And so I've seen these, I'll just say like Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 type firms. And even, they don't have to be that big, but if you went in as a fractional CMO because this company, their CMO just got let go and they're going through, they're trying to hire a new CMO, but they want somebody with proven experience. And they're like, hey, you have the keys for the next 6 months until we can get somebody hired and onboarded. Well, that's perfect because you're going to get, an executive salary for 6 months. That's doable. The economics make sense for everybody. But I think when you're doing fractional work for a shop that has 15, 20 people, they can't pay what you need to get paid for 3 months at a time for it to be economical for you. And then when that assignment is done, then you're on the bench for another 2 months till you find somebody else. I just feel like the economics are tough for everybody.
Gotcha. The way you're understanding it is more as of an interim position, right?
I know a lot of fractional folks in the accounting space, in the finance space, and I think they figured out how to make it work. I'm a little more dubious of the folks who do the fractional marketing stuff. Business model is tough. If they figured it out, good for them. I just am dubious about the business model making sense.
Totally agree with you. And so there is this perspective that you've drawn about like the interim perspective. What I'm seeing often is that they are real fractionals, meaning they have to juggle 3, 4, 5 clients at a time.
Right.
And that becomes, problematic. So I think the right question to ask is, what is it that is fractional about our role? Is it fractional timing and nature of the engagement? Is it fractional payment maybe? Or does a fractional responsibility come with that? And unfortunately, the way I see it, often it does.
Yeah, fractionals, it's just tough, because oftentimes when you come in, the agency wants you to be part of them, right? So if you come in as a fractional operations person, they want you to all of a sudden have their email address when you're emailing people. So you become them, you become part of the agency, which is a great feeling, I think, all around. I just think the business model is where it gets really tough.
Quite curious about your thoughts about the state of industry. I was just going through the Promethean report yesterday, which summarizes what's been happening in the industry for agencies, digital agencies. And obviously the downturn that we've been seeing for the last couple of years reflects in the charts and in the graphs. The growth rate has dropped from like usual 15% all the way down to like 3-5% level. Things have gotten worse, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, in my corner of the industry, which is more creative houses, so I'm on the visual side, the last 2 years were disastrous. It was the Titanic situation. Many studios closed.
Yeah.
There were massive layoffs in the VFX companies, large VFX companies like Goodbye Kansas, for example. They would have to restructure, close 6 out of 7 branches just to survive. So there are like hundreds of people being laid off. So it's a little bit more severe, but I'm curious about what is the picture that you're seeing working with your clients, and how do you help them prepare for what's coming?
Yeah. No, that's an interesting perspective. I think 2 years ago, everybody was feeling it. I mean, not just our industry, but I think globally, you had most industries that were just reeling the last 2 years, and maybe had something to do with interest rates if you're thinking on a macro level. But there were a lot of variables at play that were hurting the economy, and as a result, hurting a lot of businesses. But a lot of folks that I'm working with seem to be on this really nice rebound I've seen over the last couple of months. Whereas I do distinctly remember having conversations with folks last year around this time, as we were starting to plan, as we were saying, what is 2024 going to look like? And I think as we've done this and started to execute this plan, and they've started to see this really nice upswing, which has been great. And so I totally agree that on a macro level, the industry has been reeling. But what I'm seeing just from the handful of folks that I'm working with is there seems to be this optimism, and clients are starting to respond and say, yes, our pocketbooks are open. These projects, I feel like there have been projects that have been on the bench forever, and now these projects are finally getting the green light. So I'm seeing a lot of optimism go into the holiday season, which has been great for me to see. And you, what are you seeing personally?
What am I seeing? Well, I'm maybe this is just a confirmation bias. I've been also doing informal research on the state of disaster in the industry. But anyways, I counted like 20 studios that had to close down. And this ranges from like huge houses, which are, 600-700 people. So quite rare, whether we speak about agency or entertainment world, all the way down to, 1, 2, 3, 5 people shops.
Yeah.
So that's one measurement point that I see. The other one is that if you look at animators and illustrators, so craftsmen, people that do art for a living, more or less technical, 8 or 9 out of 10 are without work. Like they have less than they need to survive. So it's been tough.
Yeah. And would you say any of that is due to technology? Is AI impacting any of that?
To my understanding, there is a range of factors that unfortunately play out at the same time, which is, starting with the entertainment industry, which is a little bit different than everything else. You had massive strikes in Hollywood, and Hollywood has essentially turned to become a ghost town right now. Right? If you go to LA, nobody's there.
Right.
Studios are closed. People are thinking, what will I do with this space? This crisis has roots in the problem with taking risk, because what happened with like large production studios like Disney's, Paramount's, and Netflix, they would play it safe. Meaning, for the last few years, they were more and more relying on established IP, meaning doing remakes and reshuffling the stuff that proved to work. So they were very, very risk averse. And that resulted ultimately in audiences losing interest. So that's one part of the story. And there is no solution until right now. The second part of the story is obviously the AI thing and the strikes. So that's another huge factor that slowed that industry down. And if I look at the creative industry, well, this is mostly film production, like big scale film production and VFX houses that were affected by that. Then when it comes to smaller shops and the creative, like let's say commercial reality, so everybody who is on the agency value chain and serves, all these Fortune 500 companies, releasing films or campaigns for launches of new Apple or Huawei or whatever.
Right.
There are multiple factors at play, but generally, global economic downturn. It's not just the US, it's global. Next factor is the in-house movement, because through the last few years, brands were deploying more and more in-house capability, so that agencies started seeing less and less work. And so that's the next factor, right?
Right.
Another shift that I'm seeing is that people used to go for advertising, meaning brands would serve advertising and people would fall for that. And the brand narratives worked, right? It made sense to put a lot of money into a, $5 million Super Bowl commercial, or making this, huge anthem films to launch a new product.
Right.
And because people stopped trusting brand messages, meaning stuff that is coming from brands is usually polished, high production value, expensive, etc., etc. The whole pie shifted towards influencers and social media. So, it used to be 50% distribution, 50% production. And all of a sudden, the shift has become, now the pie is sliced in three parts. 30% goes to influencers, 30% goes to production, and 30% goes to distribution.
Right.
But that's not the last shift. The next shift that happened was that influencers went bankrupt. And there was about a year ago or 2 years ago, the wave of de-influencing or something like that. Right now, it's shifting towards user-generated content and working with creators directly by brands. And on top of that, you have the massive fragmentization of media, because it's not just TV and outdoor anymore. It's TikTok, it's YouTube, it's Snapchat, it's all these micro platforms. Multiplied by the number of subcultures that you have catered towards. So there's no fucking way a single anthem piece made by an agency and top world production studio can pull that.
No, not at all. No, that's a good breakdown of just the trends that are happening. And you just, I think for a lot of these agencies, there are so many factors that are impacting what their futures could look like, right? It's scary, because it's like, which do you embrace to decide, this is how I'm going to future-proof my agency?
So I guess we're aligned here. This is in line with what I'm hearing from everybody, whether I talk to fellow consultants and advisors, or whether I talk to studios or agencies. nobody knows what's going to happen. And that means, well, short-termism again, and more of a survival approach rather than future-proofing, planning, long-term planning. Yeah. So a question I like to ask very often is, do I need a survival kit right now, or do I need a future-proofing kit?
Yeah, I would say it's always, well, not always, but I'd say right now it's more about future-proofing, right? And just thinking about some of the variables you brought up, whether it's influencers, the advent of influencers and what they've done to the industry and what AI is doing and will do to the industry. It's trying to understand how do you look at the industry, not so much as how are all these things going to impact me, but really looking at it as sort of like an ecosystem and saying, how do I partner so that we can both thrive together? And I think if you look at it in terms of that and in terms of future proofing, and many people are doing this, right? It's how do I embrace influencers as a marketing channel if I'm an advertising agency? That's an easy one, but different ways. I sat in on a brainstorming session a couple of weeks ago, and there was one side of the agency who was talking about some ads that they needed to create, and then the other side was talking about, why don't we just leverage the influencers and have them create the ads and the distribution? Well, of course, that was rubbing the creatives the wrong way, because they were like, well, if they're doing all that, what are we going to do? Right. And so those are real conversations that happen inside agencies. But I think as a whole, it's really just how do you start to embrace all these potential threats to your business? And how do you start to work with them? You can either be scared of them and say that you're better, or you can start to embrace them, right? They can be frenemies in some ways, and see how you start to work with them. And I think that's the same thing that a lot of the more progressive agencies are doing with AI. It's how do we start to leverage this? Whether it's, does it help us with production? Is it speeding up production? How do we leverage this into our workflow so that we can create better outcomes for our clients? And so all these things that are happening in the industry, I think it's just about how do you leverage it? And obviously once you leverage it, it changes what your agency does. It changes the face of your agency, and people being okay that their agencies will change, right? You don't just get to be a creative shop anymore. It's, creative shop with AI or whatever it is, but it's their willingness to change and adapt based on what's happening in the industry. I think that's going to be key to future-proofing these agencies.
And I totally agree with you. And the work is still there,
right?
It's just different. And what I'm seeing is that there is so many people, especially in the motion graphics and animation industry, that I can understand that they have this strong nostalgia for the way we used to work for the last 2 decades. But this world has ended to a large extent.
Yeah.
Because 20 years, there were 30 motion design shops. And right now you have 30 just around one corner.
Right.
Everybody's doing this stuff.
Right.
So, and the market shifted. So there is no way to get back to business as usual that we know from 20 years ago. Right? It's just not happening.
Right.
But at the same time, there are opportunities, everything is democratized. Right now you can shoot films with an iPhone and you don't have to invest $100,000 into an ARRI camera.
Right.
The barrier of entry doesn't exist, which is
scary.
The problem and the solution at the same time, right?
Yeah, it's scary. It's scary because especially if you've grown as an agency, when you grow, you start to invest and buy stuff, and you're hoping that with all that investment, you've created barriers to entry. And then technology comes in and takes away all those barriers. It's scary. It's really scary. I remember seeing this story about Tyler Perry, and, he has a big studio in Atlanta, Georgia. And I guess he saw some preview from Chat when they had released some text to video. And I can't remember what the text to video is. But anyway, he saw, just as the story goes, he saw that and he was like, this right here is an existential threat to our business. And he's like, and then it seems like the way he went was, we got to figure this out. And maybe that meant pressuring lawmakers or whoever. But the point I'm trying to make is he saw that and said, we've got to adapt. Like, this is coming. There's no way around it. And I think that's a microcosm of what everybody else is seeing. Anybody who's in this world starts to see the same way we did with influencers a decade plus 20 years ago, is you're starting to see with AI, where it's coming, and we got to figure out how to make this work for us, or our clients are going to figure out how to make it work without us. Right. And so you definitely don't want to be on that side of the table.
No, totally. But at the same time, I'm not sure how closely you're following that, but my feeling is that the hype for AI has already passed. I would say half a year ago or something like that. When I was browsing through the report, it's clear that agencies have already embraced and implemented AI to a large extent. Mm-hmm. I mean, as much as possible in back office and all the hidden operations, and more and more so in creative and production department.
Right.
So I think we're past the hype, but still this is evolving so quickly that, the landscape changes every single day.
Right.
So I'm curious, the uptick that you mentioned and the enthusiasm, I wonder how much of that is actually the usual symptomatic, fourth quarter with a lot of budget success, and how much of that is larger rebound.
That's a good question. I mean, I think as we go on, that'll bear it out, right? Like, you're right. I mean, I think some people are benefiting from people like, well, we got to spend this money or we're going to lose it. You see that happening across different departments at different companies. So there's a little bit of that. But what I've been seeing for the past couple of months is that and I wasn't seeing for the last 2 or 3 years, was it seemed like a lot of my clients would get projects, they would win projects, but they wouldn't start for like another 6 or 7 months. And, you can't plan for that. You get excited and you try to staff up to try to get ahead of the business. And then on paper, you get the business, but you don't start any work for 6 months. And then you have these clients with these ridiculous accounts payable departments, and then you don't get paid for another 2-3 months, right? Looking at 60, 90 days oftentimes. And so all in all, you get a project or you win a client and you don't get paid for 9 months, and that's just an awful place to be. So fortunately, what I see happening is that timeline has compressed, right? The people are actually signing off on the work. The work is starting to get done. So that seems to be good signs. But to your point, I think, if we regrouped on this, let's say March of 2025, then you could start to see, all right, was that just the Q4 stuff or not? But in any event, it just seems like there are some positive vibes going for some agencies, and that's a great feeling.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I can totally confirm the vibes for, the projects being on hold forever. And actually from my conversations with a few studios that had to fold, that was the exact reason. Like, the money was there, it was promised.
Right.
Many of these contracts are oftentimes verbal, like,
yes,
we're doing it, guys, right?
Yeah.
But there is nothing tangible, and because these are not like $100,000 projects, these are 7 or 8 figures. The problem that's you face as a agency or studio owner is that how the hell do I cash flow that, right?
Yes.
So from the operation standpoint, this is the reality that, well, for 50 million, that's becoming, I don't even know what to say, right?
Yeah, that is a challenge. I mean, if you're not taking out any bridge loans or anything, as you said, people just go under. You can't float a company for 6 to 9 months. It's impossible.
I used to work quite a lot in China and Middle East, and obviously US. So what I've been seeing recently, I don't do much Middle East right now, but I used to, I have connections. And what I'm hearing is that people say, no, we don't have net 60, we don't have net 180, we have net 360 now. Full year from the delivery.
That's ridiculous.
which has to do with the nature of business in the Middle East, because a huge chunk of that business is government. It's state that pays all the large bills. This market is very different there. Like there is no middle market. There is huge state-funded jobs.
Yeah.
And then there are the micro companies, but the middle is very thin.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean, I don't even know how you have to just be you have to be a virtual shop where you just get people together when the project actually comes in. I mean, you couldn't have people on a payroll for that long. It'd be pointless. You'd essentially just be floating the government. That's all you're doing.
Exactly. And people go for it. But, well, it's a huge risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Come on, let's end this on a positive note. Future-proofing over survival kits.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. What are you telling folks around future-proofing or survival?
The perspective that I can bring here is that there is another transition I'm seeing in the industry. And obviously, creative industry has matured. And that means it's not a service business anymore. It's more of an offer or outcome business. It's not supply-based as it is demand-based right now. And what do I mean by that? Years ago when 3D or filming or animation or digital were new things, there was a higher barrier of entry. This stuff was novel, was innovative. And you could open a shop doing this thing because it was wild and difficult enough. And many shops could run a very good business based on that supply model, meaning we do photography, we do films.
Right.
You go to the market, you operate films.
Right.
These are services. Whereas what I'm saying right now is that nobody wants these things anymore because the market has shifted towards things which are demand-based, meaning go to the market, figure out the gaps, and use your services, your expertise with 3D, animation, filmmaking, digital, or AI to solve business problems.
Right.
So that's what I mean by outcome-based or demand-based.
Okay.
Right? You start with a business problem and then you build capability or employ capability to solve it.
Yep.
And that concept, this is something I actually came up earlier this spring, and I wrote an article announcing the end of undifferentiated studios. This is the perspective I meant, meaning, the markets for typical service firms are done. It's going to be an uphill battle.
Right. That's fascinating.
So differentiation. And if you read the report, again, I'm fresh on this report, and there is so many gems in that. When you read this report, you can see that clearly that, the companies that thrive are companies that run on 3 services. They don't have 20. Right. They don't have 50.
Right.
And they don't have 1. They have 3 services. And these services are strategically aligned. I reverse engineer that they are aligned in order to solve certain business problems. They are not random.
Yeah. It's interesting what you're saying with the focus on outcomes, which is, I think, where advisors really try to get people. I think where agencies are most comfortable is in providing the service, right? Because that's their craft. The problem that we realize when you have the visibility of looking at different agencies is that when you are focused solely on the service, it's really easy to become a commodity, right? Just using your example of if you're going to take photos, unfortunately at that point the client can say, all right, well, we talked to 2 other vendors and they said they can take photos too, but they said it'll only cost me this much. And if you just focus on the service, then you ultimately become commoditized, and then people are buying based on price, which is never where you want to be. So I do like the way you framed it, where you have to go to focus on the outcomes. It's like, okay, I know you want this picture, but tell me more. Why do you want this picture? What are you going to do with it? And I think the agencies that are able to do that can think past it isn't just a photo. They want to put it on the website. And if you can think 2, 3, 4 steps ahead as to what they really need and the outcomes they're trying to generate, I think there's a place for you. And we definitely want agencies, we collectively as kind of advisors in this space, I want clients to move away from the You know, that listing of, you go to their website and they list like 20, 30 services. And you're like, come on. There's 7 of you. How are you good at 30 different things? You know, just tell me the 2 or 3 things you do really well. And if I believe that, then when you come through the door, you can sell me some other stuff. If I see 20 things, then I'm like, no, you don't. I don't believe you.
A couple of days ago, there was this thing called All-in Agency Summit. And I'm not sure if you
I
checked
saw
that.
it. It came across my desk. Yep.
Yeah. 10 or 20 speakers from the industry sharing similar insights. What I'm seeing clearly is that people call it differently. I call it outcomes. Chris Dubois will call it an offer, right?
Yeah.
And people call it differently, but it's the same concept. Like, move away from generic services, specialize and package your expertise
Yes.
into something which solves a real business problem.
Right.
And by the way, you need to learn how to communicate
Right.
value. Like, be aware of the value that you create, communicate it, and then, create and capture it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's an entirely new model of thinking that I think will be forced by the industry, so that people have to adapt to it.
Right.
And maybe finally this will put an end to, hourly basis pricing model, time and material, and the dreaded stuff that has been with us for decades.
Yeah.
Even those smart guys laid out foundations to transition away from it.
Yeah. You know what's funny though? Even it's kind of what you said about the government work. The government, people who do government work can't get away from it. It's crazy. At least from some of
And that's a different story.
Yeah, the RFPs I see, a lot of the government work, they're like, how many bodies are you going to give me and how many hours they're going to work? You just you can't say it's a project. They're like, no, we can't build that way. And so you have to have all these bodies that you throw at projects for the government. But yes, outside the government, we got to get away from hourly pricing and all that stuff. That's been said ad nauseum, but it doesn't even make sense.
Man, pleasure having this conversation with you. I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, same here.
So many interesting perspectives.
Yeah, this was good. Thanks for inviting me on.
Catch up soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Patrick.